The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail, turning the prairie grass brittle as old parchment. Caleb Walker squinted against the glare, his weathered Stetson providing scant relief from the August heat. The cattle drive had been longer than expected, and his bones ached from 3 days in the saddle. His mare, Buttercup, picked her way carefully along the rutted path that led back to his ranch, her coat slick with sweat and dust. As they crested the small rise that overlooked the Turner property, Caleb pulled up short. Down below, near the gate of the neighboring ranch, stood 2 figures locked in what appeared to be a tense exchange. Even from this distance, Caleb could make out Elias Turner's rigid stance, arms crossed over his barrel chest. The man's voice carried on the wind, sharp and dismissive, though the words were lost to distance. The other figure was a woman, slight and still as a fence post. She stood beside a worn leather trunk, her dark traveling dress out of place against the endless sweep of golden grass. A mail-order bride. Caleb realized with a sinking feeling in his gut. He'd heard Turner boasting in town about sending for a woman from back east, talking about it like he was ordering a new plow or sack of seed. Caleb watched as Turner made a cutting gesture with his hand, then turned on his heel and stalked back toward his house. The woman didn't move, didn't call after him. She simply stood there, one gloved hand resting on her trunk, as if she'd taken root in that very spot. The cowboy wrestled with himself for a long moment. It wasn't his business. Whatever had transpired between Turner and the woman, Lord knew he had enough troubles of his own without borrowing from others. But something about the way she stood there, proud despite her abandonment, stirred an old memory he'd rather forget. He'd seen that particular brand of dignity before, in soldiers left behind on battlefields and widows at gravesides. With a muttered curse, Caleb urged Buttercup down the slope. As he approached, he could make out more details, the woman's auburn hair pinned severely beneath a plain bonnet, the dust already settling on her black boots, the tight set of her shoulders that spoke of barely controlled distress. "Ma'am," he kept his voice gentle, the way he might approach a spooked colt. "You all right?" She turned slowly, as if emerging from a trance. Her face was pale despite the heat, with high cheekbones and eyes the color of storm clouds, not beautiful in the conventional sense, but striking in her composure. "I'm quite well, thank you." Her voice held traces of Eastern refinement, though he detected a slight tremor beneath the words. "Simply waiting considering my options." Caleb dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, he could see the sheen of perspiration on her brow, the way her fingers trembled slightly against the trunk's brass clasps. "Train station's a good 20 miles back toward Cheyenne," he offered carefully. "Bad road for walking, especially with luggage." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Yes, mister. Turner was kind enough to mention that, among other things." The silence stretched between them, broken only by Buttercup's occasional snort and the whisper of wind through the grass. Caleb found himself studying the woman more closely. Her dress, though travel-worn, was well made. Her posture spoke of education, of drawing rooms and proper tea times. What desperation had driven her to answer an advertisement for a frontier wife? "Name's Caleb Walker," he said finally, touching the brim of his hat. "Got a ranch about 3 miles west, nothing fancy, but it's got 4 walls and a roof." Her eyes narrowed slightly, wariness replacing resignation. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Mr. Walker." "No, ma'am, we haven't. But seeing as how Turner's left you standing in the heat with nowhere to go, I figured propriety might take a back seat to practicality." He gestured toward the setting sun. "Gets cold quick once that goes down. Coyotes get bold after dark, too." She glanced at the Turner house, then back at Caleb. He could almost see her weighing her options, pride warring with necessity. I cannot accept charity from a stranger." "Not offering charity," Caleb said gruffly. "Offering a roof for the night and a ride to town come morning." You can work for your keep if it makes you feel better. Lord knows the place could use a woman's touch." She stiffened. "I'm not that sort of woman, Mr. Walker." Heat crept up Caleb's neck. "Didn't mean to imply. That is, I've got a barn. I'll bunk out there. You'd have the house to yourself. Door barred from the inside, if you like." For the first time since he'd approached, her expression softened marginally. "You'd sleep in your own barn." "Wouldn't be the first time. Probably more comfortable than the ground I've been sleeping on these past 3 nights. She turned to look once more at the Turner ranch, then squared her shoulders in a gesture that seemed to gather the tatters of her dignity around her like a cloak. "Clara Hastings," she said, extending her hand with the gravity of a treaty signing. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Walker, though I can only accept on the condition that I earn my keep." Her handshake was firm, despite the delicate bones he felt through her glove. This close. He caught a whiff of lavender water, incongruous in this land of leather and sweat and dust. "Fair enough, Miss Hastings." He moved to pick up her trunk, grunting slightly at its unexpected weight. "What have you got in here? Rocks?" "Books," she said, with the first hint of humor he'd seen from her. Mr. Turner seemed to find that objectionable. Caleb secured the trunk behind his saddle, shaking his head. "Man sends for a bride from 2,000 miles away, then objects to her bringing books. Turner always was a damn fool." He caught himself. "Pardon the language, ma'am." "I've heard worse, Mr. Walker. Quite recently, in fact." Caleb held out his hand to help her mount, but she hesitated. "I should tell you, I've never actually ridden a horse." Another objection of Turner's, among many, apparently. The bitterness was back in her voice, sharp as alkali water. Caleb felt an unexpected surge of anger toward his neighbor. What kind of man invited a woman to travel across the country only to reject her at his doorstep? "We'll go slow," he promised, swinging up into the saddle and reaching down for her. "Just hold on tight and let Buttercup do the work." After a moment's hesitation, Clara placed her hand in his and allowed him to pull her up behind him. She settled awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity, her hands barely touching his sides. "You'll need to hold on tighter than that," he said over his shoulder. "Don't worry about propriety. Ma'am, falling off a horse will hurt your dignity worse than holding on to a cowboy." He felt rather than heard her sharp intake of breath, but her arms tightened around his waist. Through his dust-covered shirt, he could feel the tremor in her hands, whether from fear or exhaustion or the aftermath of her abandonment. He couldn't say. They rode in silence as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The familiar rhythm of Buttercup's gait and the warmth of another human being at his back stirred memories Caleb had spent 5 years trying to bury. Another woman, another time, another bitter ending. He shook off the ghosts and focused on the present. Tomorrow, he'd take Clara Hastings to town, put her on an eastbound train, and wash his hands of the whole affair. Tonight, he'd offer her shelter and a meal. Nothing more. He had no business getting tangled up with a woman, especially one who'd traveled half a continent for another man. But as they rode through the gathering dusk, her arms trustingly around his waist and her quiet breathing warm against his back, Caleb Walker had the unsettling feeling that tomorrow might not unfold quite as simply as he planned. The Walker Ranch materialized from the darkening prairie like a ship emerging from fog. Clara felt her breath catch at the sight not from its grandeur, for there was none, but from its stark simplicity. A single-story cabin of rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney releasing a thin tendril of smoke, and a weathered barn that leaned slightly eastward, as if perpetually bracing against the wind. "Like I said," Caleb murmured as he helped her dismount. "Nothing fancy." Clara's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched ground, muscles protesting after the unfamiliar ride. Caleb steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his touch brief and impersonal. "It's shelter," she said simply. "That's more than I had an hour ago." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and began unsaddling Buttercup. Clara stood uncertainly beside her trunk, taking in her surroundings. The cabin was well maintained. Despite its humble appearance, the porch swept clean. Firewood stacked neatly against one wall. A water barrel positioned to catch runoff from the roof. "I'll see to the horse," Caleb said, hefting her trunk onto the porch with surprising ease. "Door's not locked. Make yourself comfortable." Clara climbed the 2 steps to the porch, her hand hesitating on the door handle. Entering a strange man's home went against every principle of propriety she'd been raised with. But then again, so did answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The interior was Spartan, but clean. A main room served multiple purposes: kitchen, dining, and living area all in one. A cast-iron stove dominated one corner. A simple table and 2 chairs occupied the center, and a stone fireplace took up most of the far wall. Through an open doorway, she glimpsed a small bedroom with a narrow bed and washstand. Everything spoke of a solitary life lived with military precision. No curtains softened the windows. No rug warmed the plank floor. No photographs or mementos adorned the walls. The only decoration was a worn cavalry saber mounted above the fireplace. Clara removed her gloves and bonnet, setting them carefully on the table. The silence of the house pressed against her ears after weeks of train whistles and station bustle. She moved to the stove, finding it still warm, a pot of coffee sitting on the back burner. The simple domesticity of the scene made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. The door opened and Caleb entered, carrying a bedroll and saddlebags. He paused, seeming surprised to find her standing in his kitchen, as if he'd forgotten his impulsive offer already. "Coffee's probably bitter by now," he said, setting his gear by the door. "I can make fresh. Please, don't trouble yourself on my account." "It's no trouble." He moved past her to the stove, careful to maintain distance. "When's the last time you ate?" Clara tried to remember. The stage from Cheyenne had stopped once, but her nervous stomach had refused the greasy stew on offer. "Yesterday, I believe, in Council Bluffs." Caleb made a disapproving sound. "No wonder you look ready to blow away. Sit, I'll rustle up something." She wanted to protest, to insist on helping, but exhaustion won. Clara sank into one of the chairs, watching as he moved about the kitchen with economical grace. He pulled items from various shelves: cornmeal, dried beans, a precious tin of peaches. "You cook for yourself?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he did. Who else would cook for him in this lonely place? 5 years now, he said, measuring cornmeal into a bowl. Before that, ate a lot of half-raw rabbit and hardtack. He glanced at her. Army cooking makes a man appreciate the simple things. "You were a soldier." "Cavalry, 10th Regiment." His hand stilled for a moment. "That's done with now." Clara recognized the tone, the same one she used when people asked about her parents. Some doors were better left closed. "I can help," she offered, starting to rise. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "Tonight you're a guest." She subsided, oddly touched by his gruff hospitality. As he worked, she studied him more closely. Tall and lean, with the kind of wiriness that came from hard labor rather than deprivation. His hair was dark beneath the layer of trail dust, shot through with premature silver at the temples. His hands, she noticed, bore the scars and calluses of a working man, but moved with surprising delicacy as he sliced the peaches. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. He looked up. "Why what?" "Why offer shelter to a stranger? You don't know me. I could be—" She trailed off, unable to imagine what threat she might pose to this self-contained man. "Could be what a dangerous criminal disguised as a schoolmarm." A slight smile softened his weathered features. "I'll take my chances." "I'm not a schoolmarm." "No could have fooled me with all those books." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch. A governess, actually, or was, Until the family moved to California and didn't require my services for the journey. So you answered Turner's advertisement. The momentary lightness evaporated. Yes, it seemed practical. I had savings enough for the journey and little prospect of another position without references. Caleb set a plate before her: cornbread, beans, and peaches. Simple fare, but the aroma made her stomach clench with hunger. "Eat," he commanded, pouring fresh coffee into 2 tin cups. "You can tell me the rest if you want. Or not. Your business is your own." Clara took a bite of cornbread, closing her eyes as the warmth spread through her. When she opened them, Caleb was seated across from her, his own plate untouched, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. "Mr. Turner, when he sent me away." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not. I simply wondered what failing I presented in the first 5 minutes of our acquaintance that negated 3 months of correspondence." "Turner's failings aren't yours to carry," Caleb said roughly. He pushed the beans around his plate, seeming to wrestle with something. "He said you weren't what he ordered, like you were a bolt of cloth that came in the wrong color." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "I see. And what color had he ordered? I wonder." "Young, blonde, and biddable, from what I gathered." Caleb's voice carried disgust. "Man's 40 if he's a day, with hands like ham hocks and breath that could fell a buffalo. Should be grateful any woman would answer his advertisement." The unexpected vehemence in his defense of her made Clara's eyes sting. She focused on her plate, taking small, methodical bites. "I'm 32, she said after a moment. "Perhaps that's what he objected to." "Turner's a fool," Caleb said flatly. "Age brings sense. Lord knows I'd rather have a woman who knew her own mind than some silly girl who'd swoon at the first snake she saw." "I don't swoon," Clara said, "though I can't speak to my reaction to snakes, having never encountered one." "You will. Living out here, rattlers. Mostly. They're more scared of you than you are of them, long as you watch where you step." The casual assumption that she would be staying long enough to encounter snakes made Clara's chest tighten. She set down her fork, the food suddenly sitting heavy in her stomach. "Mr. Walker, I appreciate your kindness, but we should be clear. Tomorrow you'll take me to town, and I'll find lodging until I can arrange passage back east. I won't impose on you longer than necessary." He was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee. "Where back east?" I'm not certain. Perhaps Chicago or St. Louis, somewhere I might find employment." Without references. The truth of it sat between them like a stone. Clara lifted her chin. "I'll manage. I always have." "I don't doubt it." He rose, carrying his half-empty plate to the wash basin. "But consider this, you came out here for a new start. Maybe Turner wasn't it, but that doesn't mean you have to go running back to cities that already failed you once. What are you suggesting?" He kept his back to her, shoulders tense. "Ranch needs work, more than one man can handle, especially come winter. I could use help with cooking, mending, keeping the accounts, room and board, plus wages enough to save for wherever you decide to go come spring." Clara stared at his rigid back, trying to divine his motives. "You're offering me employment." "I'm offering you time," he corrected, turning to face her. "Time to figure out what you want, not just what you'll settle for. Time without the worry of where your next meal's coming from. And you, what do you gain from this arrangement?" Something flickered in his dark eyes, loneliness, perhaps, or simply weariness. "Clean clothes, decent meals, maybe conversation that doesn't involve cows." Despite the gravity of her situation, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "I know very little about ranching, Mr. Walker." "You can learn. You brought books that tells me you're not afraid of learning." The offer hung between them, unexpected as rain and drought. Clara knew she should refuse. knew that accepting would only complicate an already impossible situation. A single woman keeping house for an unmarried man, even with the most proper intentions, invited speculation. But what waited for her back east crowded boarding houses, factories that paid starvation wages, or worse, another position as governess to children she'd come to love only to be dismissed when convenience dictated. "I'll stay through the week," she heard herself say. "We can see how the arrangement suits us both." Relief flickered across Caleb's features before he schooled them back to neutrality. "Fair enough. Now, about those sleeping arrangements." "I couldn't turn you out of your own home, Mr. Walker." The barn's warm and dry, slept in worse places. He gathered his bedroll, then paused at the door. "Bar this behind me. There's a rifle above the bed if you need it, though you won't. Nobody comes out this way without good reason." He touched his hat brim and was gone before she could formulate a response. Clara moved to the door, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. Through the window, she watched his tall figure disappear into the barn, a lantern blooming to life in the darkness. She turned back to survey the cabin that would be her home. However, temporarily, her trunk sat in the corner like a question mark, filled with books and dreams that seemed equally out of place in this sparse frontier life. But as she cleared the dishes and banked the fire, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not hope exactly, but the absence of despair. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight she had a roof over her head and the promise of honest work. It was, she reflected as she prepared for bed in a strange man's house. More than she'd had this morning when she'd stood abandoned at Elias Turner's gate, and for now, that would have to be enough. Clara woke to the sound of a rooster she didn't know Caleb owned and sunlight streaming through uncurtained windows. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling beams and the scent of wood smoke that permeated everything. Then memory rushed back the abandonment, the rescue, the unexpected offer of employment. She dressed quickly in her simplest day dress, a brown wool that had seen better days but would suit ranch work better than her traveling clothes. Through the window, she could see Caleb already at work, leading a string of horses from the barn to a fenced paddock. By the time she had the stove fired up and coffee brewing, he appeared at the door, hat in hand. He'd clearly made some effort at washing up. His hair was damp and his face clean-shaven, revealing a strong jaw she hadn't noticed beneath yesterday's trail dust. "Morning," he said, seeming uncertain of the protocol for their new arrangement. "Sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you. The bed was very comfortable." She busied herself at the stove, aware of his presence filling the small space. "How do you take your eggs?" "You don't have to." "Mr. Walker." She turned to face him. "If I'm to earn my keep, I should start as I mean to go on. How do you take your eggs?" A smile ghosted across his features. "Fried. If it's not too much trouble, over easy." They settled into a cautious rhythm over the next few days. Clara rose early to prepare breakfast, spent mornings tackling the neglected household chores, and devoted afternoons to learning the basics of ranch life. Caleb proved a patient, if laconic teacher, showing her how to gather eggs without getting pecked, how to milk the temperamental cow he'd named Bessie, how to tell poisonous weeds from edible greens. "You're taking to this better than I expected," he admitted on the fourth day, watching as she successfully retrieved eggs from the henhouse without incident. "I'm highly motivated," Clara replied, brushing feathers from her apron. "Starvation is an excellent teacher." He frowned. "You're not going to starve. Not here." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her stumble slightly. He reached out to steady her, his hand warm through her sleeve, then pulled back as if burned. "I should check the fence lines," he muttered, striding away. Clara watched him go, her arm still tingling where he'd touched her. She was beginning to understand that Caleb Walker was a man of careful boundaries. Each gesture measured, each word weighed. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, she found herself wondering what lay beneath that rigid control. That afternoon, while Caleb was out with the cattle, Clara tackled the project she'd been eyeing since arrival, the vegetable garden, or what had once been a garden, now a tangle of weeds and volunteer plants struggling for survival. She was elbow-deep in dirt when a shadow fell across her. Looking up, she found Caleb standing there, an unreadable expression on his face. "My mother kept a garden," he said quietly. "Tomatoes, beans, squash. Fed half the county during the war, even when we barely had enough for ourselves." It was the most personal information he'd volunteered. Clara sat back on her heels, sensing the weight of the memory. "Is she—" "Died 5 years ago. Lung fever." He crouched beside her, pulling a weed with unnecessary force. "I tried to keep it going, but—" He gestured at the neglected plot. "Gardens need tending," Clara said gently, "like most growing things." Their eyes met and held for a moment before he looked away. "I'll dig up some manure from the barn. Soil needs enriching if you want anything to grow." They worked side by side as the afternoon waned, mostly in silence, but a comfortable one. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, the way his shirt pulled across his shoulders as he dug, the careful precision of his movements, the slight furrow between his brows when he concentrated. "You're different than I expected," she said suddenly. He paused, leaning on the shovel. "How so?" "When you found me yesterday, was it only yesterday I thought—" She struggled for words. "Most men would have ridden on, or worse, seen an opportunity." "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed softly. "You're not?" He went very still, something shifting in the air between them. Then he cleared his throat and returned to digging. "We'll need to fence this proper. Rabbits will eat everything otherwise." Clara accepted the deflection, recognizing it as necessary for them both. Whatever was growing between them, and she couldn't deny something was needed time and careful tending, like the garden itself. That evening, she insisted on teaching him to properly season the rabbit stew she'd made. He stood beside her at the stove, following her instructions with the same focused attention he gave to everything. "Taste," she commanded, holding out the wooden spoon. He leaned in, his lips closing around the spoon, and Clara's breath caught. Such a simple, domestic gesture, yet somehow intimate in the lamplit kitchen. "More salt," he said, his voice rougher than usual. She added a pinch, stirred, offered the spoon again. This time their fingers brushed as he steadied her hand. The contact sent warmth racing up her arm. "Better," he murmured, but he wasn't looking at the stew. Clara turned away, her cheeks burning. "It should simmer for another hour. Would you— that is, I noticed you have a harmonica. Would you play—" Surprise flickered across his features. "You want me to play?" "If you wouldn't mind, it's been so long since I heard music." He retrieved the instrument from a shelf, turning it over in his hands as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. "I'm out of practice." "I won't judge." He settled into his chair by the fire and began to play a slow, mournful melody that spoke of loss and longing. Clara found herself drawn from the kitchen, sinking into the other chair, her mending forgotten in her lap. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines carved by sun and sorrow. His eyes were closed, lost in the music, and Clara saw him truly for the first time, not the taciturn rancher or the cautious host, but a man who had known grief and survived it, who made beauty from breath and brass despite the loneliness of his existence. The last note faded into silence. When he opened his eyes, he found her watching him with tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean to—" "No." She wiped her face impatiently. "It was beautiful. I hadn't realized how much I missed it. Music, art, beautiful things that serve no purpose but to be beautiful." "Not much call for beauty out here," he said quietly. "Survival takes precedence." "Does it?" She leaned forward. "Or do we just tell ourselves that because it's easier than admitting we need more than bread and shelter, He stared at her, something raw and hungry flickering in his eyes. "Careful, Miss Clara. Start wanting more than survival. You might end up disappointed." "I've been disappointed before. I survived that too." They sat in charged silence, the fire crackling between them. "Finally?" Caleb stood abruptly. "I should check the animals." Clara watched him flee, for that's what it was. She recognized into the safety of the night. She remained by the fire, her heart racing from more than the music. Over the next days, they developed a new ritual. After supper, Caleb would play his harmonica while Clara mended or read aloud from one of her books. Sometimes they talked careful conversations about impersonal things, the weather, the cattle, plans for the garden. But beneath the mundane words ran an undercurrent of awareness, growing stronger each day. Clara learned the rhythm of his days, the way he hummed tunelessly while working, how he favored his left shoulder when rain was coming. Caleb, in turn, noticed things about her, how she touched her mother's locket when anxious, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, her habit of standing at the window each evening to watch the sunset paint the mountains. "You could leave, you know," he said one evening, apropos of nothing. They were sitting on the porch, watching thunderheads build over the distant peaks. "I've got wages saved, enough for train fare and then some." Clara's hand stilled on her mending. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No." The word came quick and sharp. "I'm saying you have choices. Don't want you feeling trapped." "I've been trapped before," she said quietly. "In houses with proper curtains and china plates and people who looked right through me. This doesn't feel like that." "What does it feel like?" She considered the question, watching lightning flicker in the approaching clouds. "Like a place where things could grow, given time and tending." His hand moved on the porch boards between them, not quite touching hers, but close enough she could feel the warmth. Things. Gardens. Trust. She turned her hand palm up. An invitation. Other possibilities. He stared at her upturned hand for a long moment. Then, as the first drops of rain began to fall, his fingers interlaced with hers, calloused and gentle, trembling slightly. "I'm not good at possibilities," he said roughly. "Been too long dealing with certainties. Drought, winter, loss." "Then maybe," Clara said, squeezing his hand gently, "it's time you learned something new." Thunder rumbled overhead, and they retreated inside as the rain began in earnest. But something had shifted between them, subtle as the seasons turning, but just as inevitable. As Clara prepared for bed that night, listening to the rain drum against the roof, she thought about seeds lying dormant in hard ground, waiting for the right conditions to unfurl toward the light. Tomorrow, she would plant actual seeds in their reclaimed garden. But tonight, she held the memory of Caleb's hand in hers and wondered what might grow from such careful, tender cultivation. The weeks that followed passed in a gentle rhythm of shared work and quiet evenings. Clara's garden began to show signs of life, tiny green shoots pushing through the enriched soil, defiant in their determination to grow. She tended them with the same careful attention she was beginning to apply to the man who worked alongside her. "You're going to wear out those beans with all that staring," Caleb observed one morning, finding her crouched beside the garden rows. "I'm willing them to grow faster," she replied, not looking up. "We'll need vegetables for winter." The casual assumption that she would still be here come winter made something ease in his chest. He'd stopped mentioning train fares or opportunities elsewhere, and she'd stopped talking about temporary arrangements. "Speaking of winter," he said, "you'll need warmer clothes. Town's holding its harvest dance in 2 weeks. Figured we could pick up supplies, maybe find you some wool fabric." Clara stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "A dance?" "Don't have to attend if you don't want. Just thought. Might be nice to see other folks for a change." She studied him, noting the careful neutrality in his voice. "Would you want to attend?" "Haven't been to a dance since..." He stopped, jaw tightening. In a long while. Then perhaps it's time, she said gently. That afternoon, while Caleb was out checking the herd, Clara found herself drawn to the cavalry saber above the fireplace. She'd dusted around it for weeks, but never examined it closely. Now she could see the inscription on the blade. Lieutenant C. Walker, 10th Cavalry, for valor. Wondering about my past, she spun to find Caleb in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Not prying, it's hanging on the wall for all to see. He moved into the room, standing beside her to look up at the weapon. Fort Robinson, Nebraska, 1878, Cheyenne outbreak. Clara knew enough history to understand the Cheyennes' desperate flight toward their homeland, the cavalry's pursuit, the tragic ending. You were decorated for valor, for following orders. His voice was flat, for doing things that seemed necessary at the time but haunt a man after. Is that why you left the army? Part of it. He turned away from the saber. Also got tired of fighting other men's wars. Wanted something of my own to build instead of destroy. And have you built something? He looked around the spare cabin, then at her, working on it. That evening, as Clara served supper, she noticed Caleb seemed distracted, pushing food around his plate more than eating. Is something wrong? She asked. He set down his fork. I need to tell you something. About the dance. People will talk, seeing us together. Let them talk. It's not that simple. This is a small community. Your reputation. Mr. Walker. She fixed him with a steady gaze. My reputation was compromised the moment I answered a matrimonial advertisement. I'm a mail-order bride who was rejected on arrival. In the eyes of proper society, I'm already ruined. You're not ruined. The vehemence in his voice startled them both. You're the most proper lady I've ever... He stopped, color rising in his neck. Finish the thought, Clara said softly. He met her eyes with effort. Most proper lady I've ever had the privilege to know, which is why I won't have people assuming things that aren't true. And if they were true? The question hung between them like a held breath. Caleb's hands clenched on the table edge. Clara, I'm not a young girl. Caleb, I know what I'm saying. Do you? Because once people start talking, there's no going back. You'd be tied to this place, to... He gestured helplessly. To me. She rose and moved around the table, standing close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. Would that be so terrible? He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. For a moment, she thought he would. His hand rose as if to touch her face, hovering inches from her cheek. Then he dropped it and strode out the door, leaving her alone with the cooling supper and the weight of unspoken words. He didn't return until well past dark. Clara was sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts. When he entered, he stopped short, seeing her there in the lamplight, wearing her everyday dress with her hair in a simple braid, looking like she belonged. I thought you'd be abed, he said quietly. I wanted to apologize. I shouldn't have pressed. He hung his hat on the peg, movements careful and deliberate. Nothing to apologize for. You asked honest questions, deserve honest answers. She set aside the mending, giving him her full attention. Caleb took his usual chair, staring into the fire. Had a wife once, Sarah. Met her in Kansas before the war. Married her when I got leave in '64. Clara remained silent, sensing the cost of this confession. She waded through the war, waded through my first posting after, but the frontier, he rubbed his face. The isolation, the uncertainty, the months I was gone on patrol, it wore on her. She left in '75, went back east, filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. A bitter smile touched his lips. Ironic, considering... What happened to her? Died 2 years later. Pneumonia. Her sister wrote, said she'd remarried, had a child. He finally looked at Clara. So you see, I've already failed one woman. Won't put another through that. Clara rose and knelt beside his chair, a bold move that made him stiffen. Sarah wasn't me. I'm not a young bride with romantic notions of frontier life. I've been alone. Caleb, I know what isolation feels like in a crowded city full of people who look through you. This, she gestured to encompass the cabin, the ranch beyond. This isn't isolation. This is peace. Until the winter comes, until the cattle die or the crops fail or... She placed her hand over his where it gripped the chair arm. Then we face it together. That's what partnership means. Partnership. His voice was rough. If you'll have me, not as a hired woman or a charity case, but as... She faltered, suddenly uncertain. His hand turned beneath hers, fingers interlacing. As what? As whatever we can build between us, whatever we can grow, given time. He pulled her up, settling her on the arm of his chair, his arm coming around her waist to steady her. It was improper, intimate, and absolutely right. I'm not an easy man, he warned, set in my ways, used to solitude. I'm not an easy woman, she countered. I have opinions and speak them. I brought too many books and not enough practical clothes. Your books don't bother me. Your silences don't bother me. They stared at each other, the fire crackling beside them. Then, with infinite care, Caleb raised his free hand to her face, cupping her cheek with work-roughened gentleness. If we do this, he said quietly, we do it right, proper courtship. Let folks see we're serious before they start their gossip. Is that what this is, a courtship? If you'll have me, God knows you deserve better than a broken-down cavalryman with more past than future. Clara turned her face into his palm, pressing a kiss to the calloused skin. I don't want better, I want true. He made a sound low in his throat, drawing her closer. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in like a man starved for air. The dance, he said roughly. We'll go to the dance. Let the whole town see I'm courting you proper. And after, we see what grows. They stayed that way as the fire burned low, neither willing to break the spell. Outside, the wind sang through the grass, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its mate. But inside the cabin, two wounded souls had found something worth tending, worth protecting. When Clara finally retired to her room, she carried with her the warmth of Caleb's touch and the promise of possibilities. Through her window, she could see the faint silhouette of her garden, those brave green shoots reaching toward tomorrow. She thought of Sarah, the first Mrs. Walker, who had found the frontier too hard, the loneliness too much. Clara understood, but she also understood something Sarah perhaps hadn't, that sometimes the emptiest places left the most room for growth, and the hardest ground, once broken, could yield the strongest roots. Tomorrow, she would water her vegetables and mend more clothes and learn something new about the man who was courting her with careful, deliberate intention. But tonight, she pressed her fingers to the cheek he'd cradled and allowed herself to hope. The dance was still 2 weeks away, but already Clara could feel the music beginning, slow and sweet as a waltz across prairie grass. The night of the harvest dance arrived crisp and clear, with stars scattered across the Wyoming sky like spilled sugar. Clara stood before the small mirror in her room, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the gray in her eyes. It was 3 years out of fashion and showed wear at the cuffs, but Caleb had said she looked fine in it when she'd asked his opinion that morning. Fine, she murmured to her reflection, smiling at the memory of how his ears had reddened. High praise indeed from a man of few words. A knock at her door made her heart skip. Clara, wagon's ready. She emerged to find Caleb transformed. Gone were the worn work clothes and dusty boots. He wore a clean white shirt, dark trousers, and a vest that emphasized his lean frame. His hair was slicked back, still damp from washing, and he'd shaved so carefully she could see a small nick on his jaw. "You look—" They spoke simultaneously, then stopped, embarrassed. "Ladies first," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "You look very handsome, Mr. Walker." "Just Caleb," he corrected gently. "Thought we'd agreed on that." "Caleb." The name felt intimate on her tongue. "Shall we—" He offered his arm with careful formality, and she took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the cotton sleeve. The wagon waited outside, Buttercup in the traces. Lanterns hung on either side to light their way. The ride to town took an hour, mostly spent in companionable silence broken by Caleb pointing out landmarks in the darkness, the creek where he'd lost a calf last spring, the hill where lightning had struck a lone pine, the spot where he'd first seen antelope after arriving in Wyoming. "You love this land," Clara observed. "It's honest, harsh sometimes, but it doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." He glanced at her. "Like some people I've come to know." As they neared town, the sound of fiddle music floated on the night air. Other wagons converged on the main street, families calling greetings to one another. Clara felt Caleb tense beside her. "We don't have to stay long," he said. "Just show our faces. Pick up those supplies." "Caleb?" She placed her hand over his on the reins. "I want to dance with you." His hand stilled. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I. We'll muddle through together." The barn was lit with dozens of lanterns. Hay bales arranged along the walls for seating. A makeshift platform at one end where the musicians played. The moment they entered, Clara felt the shift in attention, conversations pausing, eyes following their progress. She lifted her chin and tightened her hold on Caleb's arm. "Walker," a jovial man with impressive whiskers, approached. "Didn't expect to see you here. And who's this lovely lady?" "Miss Clara Hastings," Caleb said formally. "Clara, this is Samuel Pritchard, runs the general store." "Miss Hastings." Pritchard's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "You're new to our community." "Yes, I arrived recently from Chicago." Clara kept her voice pleasant but distant, offering no additional information. "Chicago. How exciting! And you're staying out at Walker's place." "Miss Hastings is my housekeeper," Caleb said firmly. "We're here to enjoy the dance. Sam, not submit to an inquisition." Pritchard's eyebrows rose, but he stepped aside. As they moved deeper into the barn, Clara heard the whispers starting Turner's name. Mail order bride, living in sin. She kept her expression serene, but Caleb must have felt her tension. "We can leave," he murmured. "No, I've faced worse than small-town gossip." She spotted an empty bench. "Shall we sit?" They watched the dancers for a while, couples spinning and laughing, children darting between their elders' legs, young men eyeing young women across the room. It was a scene of community Clara had never truly been part of, always observing from the edges. "Miss Clara." She turned to find a young woman approaching, pretty in pink calico with bright blonde curls. This must be the type Turner had wanted, Clara thought wryly. "I'm Martha Brennan," the girl said breathlessly. "I just wanted to say what you did took courage. Answering that advertisement, coming all this way, even if it didn't work out with Mr. Turner." Clara blinked, surprised by the admiration in the girl's voice. "Thank you, Miss Brennan." "Oh, call me Martha. And between you and me—" Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're better off. Turner's a brute. Everyone knows it, even if they won't say. You landing with Mr. Walker instead, well, that's Providence, isn't it?" Before Clara could respond, Martha was pulled away by a young man claiming his dance. But her words lingered, a small warmth against the chill of judgment. "Providence," Caleb muttered. "Is that what they're calling it? Would you rather they called it scandal?" He stood abruptly, extending his hand. "Come on." Where? You wanted to dance? Let's give them something better to talk about. The fiddler had just struck up a waltz. Caleb led her to the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers with careful propriety. They were both rusty, stepping on each other's feet at first, but gradually found their rhythm. "You're better at this than you claimed," Clara said as he guided her through a turn. "You're easier to dance with than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. You carry yourself like a lady who's danced in fancy ballrooms. Figured you'd find this poor substitute." "I've danced in ballrooms," Clara admitted, "with men who held me like I might break, who talked about nothing but weather and fashion. This is better." "Why?" "Because you mean it. The way you hold me careful but not fragile, like something precious but not weak." His hand tightened at her waist, around them. Other couples spun and swayed, but Clara was aware only of Caleb, the warmth of his body, the slight roughness where his palm met hers, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the room. The music changed to a livelier reel, and they retreated, breathless. At the refreshment table, they encountered Elias Turner, red-faced and holding court with several other men. His eyes narrowed when he saw Clara. Well, the schoolmarm found herself a protector after all." His voice carried the ugly edge of whiskey. "Tell me, Walker, is she worth the price of feed?" The barn seemed to hold its breath. Caleb went very still, the kind of stillness Clara had seen in predators before they struck. "Apologize to the lady," he said quietly. Lady Turner laughed. "She's nothing but a—" Caleb moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment Turner was standing, the next he was on the floor, blood streaming from his nose. Caleb stood over him, fists clenched, every line of his body radiating controlled violence. "I said apologize." Turner scrambled backward, humiliation replacing bravado. "You'll regret this, Walker." "Only thing I regret is not doing it sooner." Caleb turned to Clara, offering his arm as formally as if they were in a Chicago drawing room. "Shall we get some air?" They walked out into the cool night, leaving behind the buzz of scandal. Clara should have been mortified a gentleman didn't brawl over a lady's honor in public, but the fierce protectiveness in Caleb's actions made her heart race with something other than embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said once they were away from the barn. "I shouldn't have—" She silenced him by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. For a heartbeat, he froze. Then his arms came around her, pulling her against him as he deepened the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd exchanged with suitors in her youth. This was heat and promise and barely restrained hunger. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Clara, thank you for defending me." "Always," he said roughly. "Always." They stood there in the darkness, holding each other while music and laughter spilled from the barn. Let them gossip, Clara thought. Let them judge. She had found something worth far more than reputation, a man who saw her worth fighting for, who held her like she was both precious and strong. "Take me home," she whispered. His eyes searched hers. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." The ride back was silent, but charged with anticipation. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Clara, we should talk about—" "Tomorrow," she said. "We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight, just be with me." He led her inside, lighting the lamp with shaking hands. In the soft glow, they stood facing each other, the weight of the moment settling around them. "I'm not asking for promises," Clara said. "I'm not asking for forever. Just tonight, just this." "You deserve promises. You deserve forever." "Then give them to me. But first," she stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. "Give me this." With a groan that sounded like surrender, Caleb pulled her into his arms. This kiss was different. Slower, deeper, a claiming and a yielding all at once. When he lifted her, carrying her to his room, Clara felt no fear, only rightness. In the darkness, they came together with careful tenderness, each touch a revelation, each whispered word a promise. Caleb loved her like he did everything with focused intensity and meticulous care, until Clara felt worshipped, treasured, known. Afterward, they lay entwined, Clara's head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Stay," he said into the darkness. "Not just tonight, stay." "Yes," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Yes." Outside, the wind sang through the grass, and somewhere a night bird called. But inside the little cabin, two souls had found harbor in each other, and that was music enough. The morning after the dance dawned gray and troubled, matching Clara's mood as she stood at the kitchen window watching storm clouds gather over the mountains. Caleb had risen before dawn, mumbling something about checking the cattle before bad weather hit. She knew he was giving them both space to think about what had transpired between them. The intimacy they'd shared had been tender and profound, but morning light had a way of casting shadows on nighttime certainties. Clara touched her lips, still feeling the imprint of his kisses, still feeling cherished and desired. Yet beneath the warmth lay a kernel of fear. What if this changed everything? What if it changed nothing? She was pulling fresh bread from the oven when hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Through the window, she saw 3 riders, Elias Turner, flanked by 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Her stomach clenched. Caleb emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held loosely at his side. Clara couldn't hear the words exchanged, but she could read the tension in every line of Caleb's body. Turner gestured angrily, his face still bearing the marks of last night's altercation. Unable to remain inside, Clara stepped onto the porch. The men's voices carried clearly now. "That water's been free range for years," Turner was saying. "Now suddenly you're claiming exclusive rights." "I'm claiming what's mine by deed," Caleb replied evenly. "Same as always. Your cattle are welcome at the Eastern Fork, like we agreed 3 years ago." "Agreements changed." Turner's smile was ugly. "Man who can't control his woman can't expect to control his water rights." Clara saw Caleb's knuckles whiten on the rifle stock. "You've said your piece. Now get off my land." "Our land, soon enough." One of Turner's companions, a lean man with dead eyes, spoke for the first time. Amazing what a man will sign when he's desperate, or drunk. "I've signed nothing." "Haven't you?" Turner produced a paper from his coat. "Funny thing about that night at Murphy's saloon last month. You were pretty deep in your cups, celebrating that cattle sale." Caleb went still. "What are you talking about?" "You don't remember agreeing to sell me the water rights for $1. Turner's grin widened. "Got your signature right here, witnessed proper and everything." Clara watched the color drain from Caleb's face. He reached for the paper, but Turner pulled it back. "I'll see you in court. Walker, bring your woman if you like. I'm sure Judge Brennan would love to hear all about your living arrangements." He touched his hat mockingly to Clara. "Ma'am." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Caleb standing rigid in the yard. Clara approached slowly, as she might a wounded animal. "Caleb, I was drunk." His voice was hollow. "One night, first time in 2 years, the cattle sale had gone well, and He turned to her, anguish in his eyes. "I don't remember signing anything, but I was drunk enough that I might have." "We'll fight it. No court would uphold—" "You don't understand." He stalked toward the house, Clara following. "Judge Brennan is Turner's cousin, and after last night, making a spectacle over you." He slammed his palm against the doorframe. "I've been a fool. You were defending my honor." "I was marking territory like a damn dog." The self-loathing in his voice made her flinch. "And now Turner's going to use it to take everything. Then we'll find another way. We," he rounded on her. "There is no we in this. Clara, this is my failure, my loss. The words hit her like a physical blow. I see. So last night meant nothing. Last night was... He stopped, running his hands through his hair. Last night was me forgetting myself, forgetting what I am. And what are you? A man who brings ruin to everyone foolish enough to care for him. The words came out raw, bleeding. First Sarah, now you. I'm not Sarah. Clara's own anger flared. I'm not some fragile flower who'll wilt at the first sign of hardship. I chose to be here. I chose you. You chose wrong. The flat finality of it made her eyes burn. So that's it, one setback, and you're ready to give up on the ranch. On us. What us? He wouldn't meet her eyes. You're my housekeeper, that's all. Should have kept it that way. Each word was a carefully placed wound. Clara recognized what he was doing, pushing her away to protect her, but understanding didn't lessen the pain. You're a coward, she said quietly. His head snapped up. What? You heard me. You're so afraid of failing again that you'd rather destroy this yourself than risk fighting for it. She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. I've lost everything before my parents, my position, my dignity when Turner rejected me. But I'm still here, still fighting. What's your excuse? My excuse is reality, he growled. Turner's got money, connections. That forged signature will hold up in Brennan's court. I'll lose the water rights, and without water, the ranch dies. You think I want you here to watch that happen? I think you're so used to being alone that you don't know how to let someone share your burdens. Maybe because my burdens break people. I'm not broken. She grabbed his shirt front, surprising them both. I'm here. I'm choosing to stay. Why can't you see that as strength instead of foolishness? For a moment, his resistance wavered. She saw the man from last night tender, passionate, unguarded. Then the walls slammed back into place. Pack your things. I'll take you to town tomorrow. No. This isn't a request, Clara. Then I'm not your soldier to command. She released his shirt, stepping back. You want me gone, you'll have to throw me out yourself. But know this if you do. It won't be Turner who destroyed what we have. It'll be you. She turned and walked to her room, closing the door with quiet finality. Behind her, she heard Caleb's fist hit the wall, followed by silence. The rest of the day passed in strained quietness. Clara went about her chores mechanically, while Caleb disappeared into the range. When he returned at dusk, she had supper waiting, but he barely touched it. That night, she lay awake listening to him pace the main room. Around midnight, the footsteps stopped. She heard the creak of his chair, then the low, mournful sound of his harmonica. The melody was different tonight, not the usual frontier ballads, but something classical, refined. It took her a moment to recognize it, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, transformed into something uniquely his. Unable to resist, she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and emerged. He didn't stop playing, but his eyes tracked her movement as she settled into the opposite chair. When the last note faded, she spoke into the darkness. Where did you learn Chopin? Sarah taught me. She played piano. His voice was rough with memory. Said even cowboys needed culture. She was right. She usually was right about leaving, too. Clara leaned forward. Tell me what happened. Really happened. Not the version you've been punishing yourself with. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the winter of '74 was brutal. I was gone 6 weeks on patrol, chasing ghost dancers who weren't there, following orders that made no sense. When I got back, Sarah had nearly frozen. The woodpile was gone. The well was frozen. She'd been burning furniture to stay warm. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? I knew winter was coming. I chose duty over her welfare. His laugh was bitter. She begged me to resign my commission, to take her back east. I refused. Said 1 more year, always 1 more year, until she stopped asking and just left. She left because the life was too hard, not because you were. Same result. Clara rose and knelt beside his chair, taking the harmonica from his unresisting fingers. No, not the same. She wanted you to be someone else. I want you to be yourself, stubborn, scarred, imperfect, mine. Clara. Her name was a prayer and a protest. We'll fight Turner together. We'll find a way. That's what partners do. And if we lose, if I drag you down with me, then we'll start over somewhere else. Together. She cupped his face, feeling the wetness on his cheeks. The only way you fail me is by pushing me away. He pulled her up and into his arms, holding her with desperate strength. I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in. Then we'll learn together, one day at a time. She felt the moment he surrendered the tension leaving his body, the walls finally crumbling. When he kissed her, it was different from last night's passion. This was deeper acclaiming of souls, not just bodies. Stay, he whispered against her lips. God help me, stay! Always, she promised. They held each other as the storm finally broke outside, rain lashing against the windows. Let it come, Clara thought. They would weather this storm and whatever followed, together. In the morning, she would help him strategize against Turner. They would go through his papers, look for proof of the forgery, seek allies in town. It would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But tonight, they had this two wounded hearts choosing trust over fear, love over solitude. And that, Clara knew, was its own kind of victory. The storm that had broken over the ranch that night seemed to wash away more than dust. In the days that followed, something fundamental shifted between Clara and Caleb. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something deeper touches that lingered, glances that spoke volumes, a partnership that transcended mere words. They spent mornings strategizing over coffee, Clara's quick mind finding angles Caleb hadn't considered. The witnesses, she said one morning, tapping the forged document Turner had waved. Who would have witnessed this supposed agreement? Murphy, most likely, owns the saloon. And probably Jake Morrison, he's always hanging around Turner. Then we need to talk to them, find inconsistencies in their stories. Caleb studied her with something like wonder. You should have been a lawyer. Women can't be lawyers, she said wryly. But we can be thorough. That afternoon, while Caleb tended the cattle, Clara rode Buttercup into town alone, a decision that had sparked their first real argument as a couple. Absolutely not, he'd said flatly. I won't have you facing those vultures alone. Someone needs to stay with the herd, and I'm less threatening than you, more likely to get information. Clara, trust me. She'd placed her hand over his heart. The way I trust you. Now, entering Murphy's saloon through the ladies' entrance, Clara summoned every ounce of Eastern propriety she possessed. The establishment was nearly empty in the afternoon. Just Murphy polishing glasses behind the bar and two old-timers playing checkers. Mrs. Walker. Murphy's eyes widened. They weren't married yet, but Clara didn't correct him. What brings a lady like you to my establishment? Information, Mr. Murphy. She settled at a small table, arranging her skirts precisely. About a night last month when Mr. Walker was celebrating a cattle sale. Murphy's friendly demeanor cooled. Don't recall much about that night. How curious. Yet you witnessed a legal document. Did I? He busied himself with the glasses. Lots of papers get signed in here. Clara produced a small leather purse, setting it on the table with a meaningful clink. Perhaps something might refresh your memory. Murphy eyed the purse, clearly torn. After a long moment, he moved closer, lowering his voice. Look, Mrs. Walker, I like your husband. Good man, but Turner's got a long reach, if you understand me. I understand perfectly. I also understand that false witness is a serious crime, one that Judge Brennan's cousin or not would be hard to overlook if brought to the attention of, say, the territorial prosecutor in Cheyenne. Murphy paled. Now, see here. What time did this signing supposedly occur? Near midnight. Turner said you didn't see it yourself. Murphy shifted uncomfortably. It was busy, but Jake Morrison swore. Ah, yes, Mr. Morrison, Turner's employee. Clara stood, leaving the purse on the table. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. You've been most helpful. I didn't tell you nothing. Precisely. She smiled sweetly and swept out, leaving Murphy staring after her in confusion. Her next stop was Martha Brennan's family mercantile. The young woman from the dance greeted her warmly, though her expression grew troubled when Clara explained her purpose. Papa won't go against Cousin Elias, Martha said quietly, glancing around the empty store. But, she bit her lip. There might be something. Wait here. Martha disappeared into the back room, returning with a ledger. Jake Morrison has an account here. Look at the date you mentioned. Clara studied the entries. According to the ledger, Morrison had purchased supplies for a trip to Denver on the very night he'd supposedly witnessed the signing. He wasn't even in town. Left that afternoon. Didn't return for a week. Martha closed the ledger quickly. You didn't get this from me. Get what? Clara pressed Martha's hand gratefully. You're very brave. Not brave. Just tired of men like Cousin Elias thinking they own everything and everyone. Martha's chin lifted. Besides, anyone can see how Mr. Walker looks at you. That's worth protecting. Clara rode home with her heart lighter than it had been in days. She found Caleb in the barn, mending tack, and quickly shared what she'd learned. Morrison couldn't have witnessed anything, she concluded triumphantly. He was in Denver. We can prove it. Caleb set down the leather he'd been working, pulling her into his arms. You wonderful, clever woman. He kissed her soundly. But Turner's not going to give up easy. This'll get uglier before it's done. Then we'd better be ready. That night, they sat together on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in a shared blanket, planning their next moves. Clara leaned against Caleb's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. I never thanked you, he said suddenly. For what? For staying, for fighting, for... He pressed a kiss to her hair. For being you. Caleb. Let me say this. His arm tightened around her. I spent so long believing I was meant to be alone, that it was better that way, safer. Then you arrived with your books and your backbone and your beautiful stubbornness. And suddenly alone felt like the coldest word in the world. Clara turned in his arms, seeing the vulnerability he still fought to hide. You're not alone anymore. Neither of us is. I want to marry you. The words came out in a rush. Not because of propriety or what the town thinks. Because I want the right to call you wife. To know you'll be here when I wake up. That we'll face whatever comes as one. Caleb Walker, are you proposing to me? Badly, apparently. He shifted, reaching into his pocket. I had this whole speech planned, but... He produced a simple gold band. It was my mother's. Had to dig it out of the bottom of an old trunk. It's not much. It's perfect. Clara held out her hand, watching it tremble slightly. Yes, yes to marriage. Yes to partnership. Yes to whatever comes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with reverent care. It was slightly loose, worn thin with age, but Clara had never seen anything more beautiful. When? She asked. Tomorrow, tonight, now. His eagerness made her laugh. After we deal with Turner, I want our wedding to be a celebration, not a siege. Fair enough. He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise. But don't make me wait too long. They were interrupted by hoofbeats approaching fast. Caleb was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, but relaxed when Sam Pritchard came into view. Walker, Miss Hastings. The shopkeeper was breathless with excitement. Thought you should know. Turner's been bragging all over town about that water rights business. But here's the interesting part. Old Pete Thompson was in the saloon that night, stone cold sober. Says he saw the whole thing different than Turner tells it. Different how? Clara leaned forward. Says Walker here was drunk. True enough. But when Turner tried to get him to sign something, Walker threw the paper in the fire, called Turner used some words I won't repeat in front of a lady. Point is, Pete says there was no signing. None at all. Caleb gripped the porch rail. Pete would testify to that. Already told Judge Brennan he would. Judge might be Turner's cousin, but he's got political ambitions. Can't afford to look corrupt. Pritchard grinned. Turner's spitting mad. Knows his case is falling apart. After Pritchard left with their thanks and a promise of future business, Clara and Caleb stood together in the gathering darkness, the weight of reprieve settling over them. It's not over, Caleb warned. Turner won't give up easy. No, Clara agreed. But he knows now that you're not alone, that we're not defenseless. She touched the ring on her finger, still marveling at its presence. That makes all the difference. That night, they made love with a new tenderness, a recognition of permanence. When Clara lay in Caleb's arms afterward, listening to coyotes sing to the stars, she thought about the journey that had brought her here: rejection, despair, unexpected rescue, and now this, a love worth fighting for. No regrets, Caleb murmured against her hair. Only one. He tensed. What? That I didn't answer your advertisement instead of Turner's. His chest rumbled with quiet laughter. I never placed an advertisement. You should have. It would have saved us both time. Maybe. He tilted her face up to his. But then we wouldn't have this story. How a broken-down cowboy found his heart again when he rescued a mail-order bride. I prefer to think of it as how a discarded woman found her home with a man brave enough to offer shelter to a stranger. Either way, he said, kissing her softly, it ends the same, together. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, but inside the little cabin, two hearts beat as one, warm against whatever storms might come. Autumn arrived in Wyoming with a painter's touch, transforming the endless grass into waves of gold and amber. Clara stood on the porch, admiring the yellow chrysanthemums she'd coaxed into bloom despite the early frost. They clustered against the cabin wall like small suns, defiant and cheerful against the weathered wood. Never thought I'd see flowers here again, Caleb said, coming up behind her. His arms encircled her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Ma would have loved these. Clara leaned into his warmth, covering his hands with hers. The simple gold band on her finger caught the morning light. They'd been married 2 weeks now, in a quiet ceremony at the church with Sam Pritchard and Martha Brennan as witnesses. No fuss, no grand celebration, just two people pledging their lives to each other with honest words and open hearts. I was thinking of planting bulbs along the fence line, Clara said, daffodils and tulips for spring. Planning ahead. He pressed a kiss to her temple. I like that. Someone has to, left to your own devices. You'd still be eating beans from a can and sleeping in that drafty barn. Best thing that ever happened to me. Finding you on Turner's doorstep. Being rejected by Turner was the best thing that happened to me. Clara countered. Led me to you. Turner had left the territory a week after the water rights dispute collapsed. Word was he'd sold his ranch to a family from Missouri and headed for California. Clara felt only relief at his departure, one less shadow over their happiness. Come on, Caleb said, releasing her. Want to show you something? He led her to the barn, where he'd been working on a mysterious project for days, refusing to let her see. Now he stood aside, gesturing proudly at his handiwork. A chicken coop. Clara examined the sturdy structure with delight. Oh, Caleb, it's wonderful. Figured if we're staying, might as well do it proper. Ordered a dozen Rhode Island Reds from the Brennans. Should arrive next week. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly shy. And I thought, Well, there's room to expand it. For the future. Clara understood what he wasn't quite saying. Children. A family. The future they were building together brick by brick. Seed by seed. "It's perfect," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "You're perfect." "Far from it, but I'm trying." That afternoon, while Caleb worked on reinforcing the coop, Clara settled at the kitchen table with the ranch ledgers. She'd taken over the bookkeeping, discovering a knack for numbers that surprised them both. The cattle sale had been good, but winter was coming, and every penny counted. She was deep in calculations when hoofbeats announced a visitor. Through the window, she saw a familiar figure, Martha Brennan, but her usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by urgency. "Martha, what's wrong?" Clara met her at the door. "I had to warn you," Martha said breathlessly. "There's a man in town asking questions about you, about your past in Chicago." Clara's blood chilled. "What kind of questions?" "He says he's a lawyer, representing someone named Harold Ashford. Claims you were engaged to marry his client and broke the contract." The room seemed to spin. Clara gripped the doorframe, memories flooding back. Harold Ashford, the son of her last employers, a weak-chinned boy who'd pressed his suit despite her clear refusal. She'd left Chicago partly to escape his persistence. Clara Caleb appeared, taking in Martha's distressed face and Clara's pallor. "What's happened?" There was a man in Chicago, the son of my employers. He wanted to marry me, wouldn't accept my refusal. I thought when I left..." Clara's voice trailed off. "This lawyer, Mr. Crane, says there was a formal engagement," Martha continued, "that you signed papers." "I signed nothing." Clara's indignation flared. "Harold tried to trick me once, said he needed a witness signature for a business document. When I realized it was an engagement contract, I tore it up." Caleb's expression darkened. "Where is this lawyer now?" "At the hotel." "But Caleb," Martha warned. "He's not alone. Has 2 men with him. Rough-looking types." "Stay here," Caleb commanded, reaching for his gun belt. "No." Clara caught his arm. "We handle this together. Remember partnership." He looked ready to argue, then nodded grimly. "Together." They found Crane holding court in the hotel lobby, a thin man with calculating eyes and an oily smile. He brightened, seeing Clara. "Miss Hastings, or should I say, Mrs. Ashford. Your fiancé has been most worried." "I am Mrs. Walker," Clara said clearly, "and I have no fiancé. I'm married." "Ah, but you see, your prior commitment to Mr. Ashford supersedes any local arrangements." Crane produced a document. "Your engagement contract, signed and witnessed." Clara examined the paper. Fury Building? It was indeed her signature, carefully traced from something else, but close enough to pass casual inspection. "This is forged, just like Turner's supposed water rights." "Prove it," Crane challenged. "Maybe we can't prove the forgery," Caleb said quietly. "But we can prove she's my wife, legal and binding, recognized by the territory of Wyoming. Territory law doesn't supersede a prior contract from Illinois." "Maybe not," a new voice interjected. They turned to find Judge Brennan in the doorway, Martha at his side. "But it does require proper documentation. Mind if I examine these papers?" "Mr. Crane." Crane hesitated, then handed over the documents. Judge Brennan studied them carefully, then looked up with a slight smile. "Interesting. This witness signature, Thomas Hartwell. I happen to know Judge Hartwell in Chicago. We correspond regularly." He fixed Crane with a stern gaze. "Shall I wire him to verify his signature?" Crane's composure cracked. That won't be necessary." "I thought not. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Crane, you're going to wire Mr. Ashford that you found Clara happily married and unavailable. Then you're going to leave Wyoming. Tonight." You can't? I can and I will. False documents, harassment of a married woman. Interstate fraud, shall I continue? Judge Brennan's usually jovial face was stern. My cousin Elias was a fool and a bully, but he was family. You, sir, are merely a criminal. Crane gathered his papers with shaking hands and fled. Judge Brennan turned to Clara and Caleb with a warmer expression. Martha told me everything. Young woman has quite a backbone, reminds me of you. Mrs. Walker. He touched his hat. Welcome to Wyoming, officially. After the judge left, Clara stood in the street, trembling with reaction. Caleb wrapped his arms around her, heedless of propriety. It's over, he murmured. He can't touch you now. How many more ghosts will come calling? Clara whispered against his chest. Doesn't matter. We'll face them all. He pulled back to look at her. You're mine now. Clara Walker. Legal and binding, like I told him. Nothing changes that. That evening, as Clara prepared supper in their warm kitchen, she reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. A mail-order bride, rejected and abandoned, only to find something far better than what she'd sought. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a house, but a home. Caleb came in from evening chores, bringing the scent of hay and honest work. He'd made something else in the barn, she could tell by the barely suppressed excitement in his eyes. Close your eyes, he instructed, guiding her outside. When she opened them, she gasped. A small bench sat beside her chrysanthemums, beautifully crafted from pine, with their initials carved into the back. CW plus CW, surrounded by a heart. Thought you might like somewhere to sit and watch your garden grow, he said softly. Clara sank onto the bench, pulling him down beside her. The sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, the mountains standing purple against the horizon, their small ranch spread before them, not grand, but theirs. Thank you, she said, meaning more than just the bench. For what? For seeing me that day, for offering shelter, for fighting for us, for this life. He took her hand, thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. Thank you for staying, for teaching me to hope again, for making this place a home. They sat together as stars began to emerge, the autumn air crisp with promise. Inside, supper waited. Tomorrow would bring new chores, new challenges, perhaps new ghosts to face. But tonight, they had a bench, a garden, a life being built with patience and love. Clara thought of the woman she'd been just months ago, standing abandoned with her single trunk, believing her last chance had failed. How wrong she'd been. That wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The beginning of Clara Walker, rancher's wife, keeper of gardens and chickens and ledgers, partner in all things. What are you thinking? Caleb asked, noting her smile. That every ending is also a beginning, and that sometimes the life we plan isn't nearly as good as the life that finds us. He stood, offering his hand with the same grave courtesy he'd shown that first day. Come inside, Mrs. Walker. Let's start the rest of our lives. Clara took his hand, rising into his embrace. Behind them, the chrysanthemums nodded in the evening breeze, bright promises against the coming winter, and somewhere in the darkness, a coyote sang to its mate a wild, joyful sound that spoke of partnership and survival and home. They went inside together, closing the door on the past, opening their hearts to tomorrow. Thank you for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. If you enjoyed Clara and Caleb's journey, we'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of frontier romance and adventure. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. Did you feel the connection between Clara and Caleb? What was your favorite moment? Until next time, partners.